Night continues here on One News Now Business. I'm Riza Diaz. Here are the biggest stories on the economic and corporate fronts. The Philippine economy expanded at a slower pace of 6.4% in the first quarter of 2023. It is lower than the 7.1% growth in the previous quarter at the 8% figure in the first quarter of last year. It also is the lowest growth registered after 7 quarters when the country started to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. The Philippine Statistics Authority said the main contributors to the first quarter growth include wholesale and retail trade. Despite the lower expansion, NED Secretary Arsenio Balisacan said the Philippines is returning to its high growth trajectory.
While this quarter's growth figure is lower than the 8.0% year-on-year growth rate recorded in the first quarter of 2022, we need to exercise caution in interpreting this as a slowdown since the previous year's growth came from a low base. Rather, the economy is normalizing its previous trend. The better-than-expected first quarter performance this year implies that we are returning to our high growth trajectory despite the various challenges and headwinds we have faced.
Now, to help us break down these numbers further, we have on the show ING Bank Manila Senior Economist Nikki Mapa. Good morning, Nikki. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
So, GDP growth is slowed at 6.4% in the first quarter of 2023. That's from the 7.1% in the fourth quarter of 2022 and 8% in last year's first quarter. Did you see this, Nikki? Did you expect this figure? And what are the factors that contributed to this slower growth?
Yeah, well, the growth that was posted in the first quarter was slightly better than market consensus. We actually had growth at 6.5%, so it's a little below our estimate, but I think all in all, this is what we were expecting for the first quarter. Drivers for growth, interestingly, it was all sectors. We had mainly household consumption driving the expansion, but we also got a nice contribution from capital formation or investments, as well as a surprise expansion for government spending. So in that regard, it was a good number. However, this might be the best number for the year, which is what our expectation is, that we could see growth moderate further in the next 3 quarters to come.
Well, we heard NEDA Secretary Mr. Balisacan acknowledges that this GDP print is lower than that of previous quarters, and he says the public should exercise caution in interpreting this as a slowdown. What would your take on that be? And if this is not a slowdown, then what would this be?
Well, we do feel that we agree with the Secretary that we are starting to see the Philippine economy get back to sort of more normal activities. He also did mention that pent-up demand, or so-called revenge spending, is starting to fade. And we do agree with this assessment. We are seeing household consumption still quite positive, but starting to slow across sectors. So as people get back into the groove of things, the entire splurge attitude that I think that most of us had for the past few quarters after lockdowns is starting to dissipate just a bit. So I think what he was trying to, Dr. Balisacan was also trying to make a point that despite all the headwinds and challenges that we're facing, we are still expecting to grow and post a very robust and decent number. However, it might fall shy of the government's full year target of about 6.5% to 7.5%. Our expectation is that growth will outperform the rest of the region, but it might be slower than what we hope for at about 5.5%.
So just to clarify, because you mentioned again these drivers of growth, and with that of the numbers that was given by the Secretary, we're still on track on the growth target of 6 to 7% this year, correct?
Well, I do hope that we can achieve that aspiration. However, it does look like there are several challenges that sort of linger in the background that might make this a challenging year. Inflation is still quite high, even if it is on the downtrend. Elevated borrowing costs. Interest rates are at extremely high levels right now, and this might sap or choke some momentum from the investment outlays that we're seeing. Bank lending is starting to moderate, so that's not a good sign, as this would cap potential or productive capacity down the line. So Yes, still keeping our fingers crossed for us hitting the 6.5 to 7.5% growth, but does look like the it will be a tall order to hit that number.
You mentioned inflation. Is that a risk for our country's economic growth this year, Nikki?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the main driver of growth is always going to be, at least for now, household consumption. So when faced with higher prices, households are starting to adjust their spending. We're also seeing an increase in savings now from households. So yeah, we could see consumption slow a bit further in the coming months with inflation so high. So that might, I guess, slow the momentum just a bit, but still be an expansion.
What's the forecast when it comes to inflation for this year? Would it even return to the target of the Bangko Sentral Pilipinas to about 2 to 4%?
Yeah, well, in terms of hitting the monthly target, the monthly numbers fall within target. We do see it returning to that band of 2 to 4% by the fourth quarter. However, on average, because we had such high numbers in the first quarter of the year, we might see inflation above target again this year. Notwithstanding, even if inflation is still quite high, I think the next important development would be where will interest rates go. Right now, interest rates are so high and elevated. That is definitely taking a shine out of the bank lending as well as capital formation, which is another important aspect of growth.
With inflation that is just on that level, what would programs from the government should be implemented, do you think, for the public to be able to cope up with these elevated prices?
Well, I think the most glaring or the most prominent, I guess, issue that we have to tackle, it would be food inflation and food security. We are facing an El Nino episode later in the year. Food inflation accounts for roughly a third of overall inflation. So I think Secretary Mapa would made the point that as long as if you just handle food inflation, you pretty much get a good handle on overall inflation. So I guess government should refocus its efforts. Reinvigorate all the push to make sure that food prices are stable, that production is maximized here in the country, and if need be, import just to ensure that we have a stable supply so that inflation for food items doesn't reach such a high level.
Well, thank you for sharing with us your time and your insights. That's Nikki Mapa, Senior Economist for ING Bank Manila.
Thank you. Take care. Stay safe.
And we'll be back with more stories after the break. Keep it here on One News. watching One News Now. I'm Riza Diaz. A Senate panel has approved in principle a measure which seeks an across-the-board minimum wage hike of 150 pesos after one public hearing. The Senate Committee on Labor said it has sent a proposal to a technical working group to work out a graduated wage increase to lessen the burden of the wage hike on micro, small, and medium enterprises. Senate President Migs Zubiri says the government has supported local industries with pro-business measures. With more businesses having recovered from the pandemic, Zubiri appealed to the private sector to support its workers. Zubiri also notes that the last time a wage hike was passed via legislation was in 1989 prior to the creation of the Regional Wage Board.
Napakababa po ng mga increase nila at napakatagal, long durations. Kawawang-kawawa po ating mga kapatid na hindi po makaramdam ng disenteng buhay dahil sa napakababang wages.
Meanwhile, the Employers Confederation of the Philippines wants economic managers to provide input on the proposed across-the-board wage hike. This as the group says the Senate panel may not have consulted the appropriate agencies, such as the Trade Department and the National Economic and Development Authority, in pushing for higher wages. The group also says that only 16% of the country's total workforce would benefit should this bill be passed.
84% tricycle drivers, diesel drivers. Wala naman mga employers yan eh. Pag nagtaas ka ng sweldo, sino magtataas ng sweldo nila? So, kung tataas mo yung 16%, eh anong ginawa mo? Inilayo mo lang yung kita ng mga informal sector sa formal sector.
The Philippine government eyes a $500 million climate risk loan from the World Bank. The lender said it aims to strengthen the country's resilience against disasters, focusing on education and health sectors. It added that the loan will fund projects for improvements of schools and health-related infrastructure. The policy loan, which includes an option for a catastrophe-deferred drawdown, is expected to be approved by September. The Philippines ranked first in the 2022 World Risk Index, with disasters killing over 10,000 people between 2010 and 2019. Meanwhile, the Transportation Department will still consider solicited proposals for the operations and maintenance of the Ninoy Aquino International Airport. The agency says it is open to solicited proposals, which it had planned with the help of the Asian Development Bank. This in parallel to the unsolicited proposal worth 100 billion pesos submitted by a consortium of conglomerates. The unsolicited proposal's valuation of the project includes the upfront payment to the government and committed investments in new airport facilities and technology. The DOTR has 35 days to check the completeness of the consortium's submission and expect the review to finish by June. Online payment platform GCash clarifies that fraudsters were behind the anomalous transactions that hit some users earlier this week. GCash says the unauthorized transactions that saw some users' account depleted was a phishing scheme, not an incident of hacking or a scam. GCash says it found a link that was sent out to several users when it examined the fraudster's account's activity log. The fraudster phished information from customers who clicked on the link.
Kaya naman po nasabi natin na may phishing, meron po tayong mga logs ng mga activities. At dyan po sa fraudster na yan, ang nangyari is that nakita natin may request siya to link itong mga account ng ating mga users at ang OTP po nila ay na-compromise at ito po ay na-phish nung ating fraudster.
GCash said it was able to immediately rectify the issue and return the amount that had been deducted from users. The company also assured that the safety features in place were sufficient and that it continues to invest in new security tech.
Ang unang aksyon na ginawa natin is to ensure protection of customer assets. Unfortunately, sa ibang tao, medyo aberya yon ginawa natin. Pero yun po yung ating proseso, no? Pangalawa, GCash ay safe po dahil we continue to invest sa mga safety mechanisms at technology.
And those are the top business stories of the hour. I'm Riza Diaz. Join us again at 2 in the afternoon. We are One News. All sides, all the time.